Okay, great. Well, it looks like individuals are starting to come in. As I mentioned, we do have a very full agenda, two great topics. So I want to first start off and say good morning or good afternoon, depending on your location. And thank you for joining the International and Government Relations Committee session. I am Latanya Mitchell. I'm the Program Division Director for the Office of Human and Animal Food Operations, Division West 2, in the Office of Regulatory Affairs of the Food and Drug Administration. And I'm going to serve as the co-chair. Well, I am the co-chair for this committee. I want to extend a warm welcome to everyone, and I'm glad you were able to take time out of your busy schedule and register and attend the committee session. I also want to acknowledge and extend my gratitude for the members who helped plan today's session. And you'll have an opportunity to meet two members today as they're serving as moderators. Before we get started, we have, as I mentioned at the top, two great topics that we're going to hear from today. The committee has been very busy planning this session, and so we're very grateful that you all are able to be here. But I do have some committee business and housekeeping items to discuss first. So just as a way of background and as a way of introduction, the purpose of the International and Government Relations Committee is to achieve mutual working relationships with the association, and that's AFDO, and federal, state, and local governments in accomplishing the goals and objectives of AFDO in relation to consumer protection and the food, drugs, and product safety fields. We have four main objectives, and the first one is to serve as a focal point for the committee of AFDO and the federal, state, and government, local governments in matters where intergovernment activities are crucial to accomplishing AFDO's national objectives. The second is to promote the establishment and implementation of uniform procedures, codes, agreements among various units of government within foods, drugs, and product safety agencies. Our third objective is to recommend to the AFDO board new programs and activities where intergovernmental activities can be utilized to accomplish the goals and objectives of the association. And the fourth is to serve as an advisor to the board on implementation of national strategies and programs of the association. So this year, one of our committee charges was to identify topics of interest in international speakers for the annual conference. And this, of course, is being fulfilled today. Our first topic is global perspectives, regulatory landscape, and challenges for cultured meat. And this topic will be moderated by Sally Powell-Price, who's a regulatory expert, food safety with Millipore Sigma. And the second topic is the food traceability final rule, requirements for additional traceability records for certain foods under FSMA Section 204. And Julie Malia, who is a food inspector at the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, will moderate this topic. So just a couple of housekeeping items. The first one is we ask that you keep your microphone on mute when you're not speaking so that we can hear whoever is speaking clearly. And this kind of helps present the underground sound when someone has their mic open, and also the interruptions from background noise. And then we will try to allow time to ask questions at the end of each topic, but please feel free to use the chat to type your questions in the chat box. But I'm sure Sally and Julie will also provide some additional instructions on how to submit questions. One question I can answer in advance, and that is if the speakers are able to share their slides, we will post them under the committee portal on the AFDO's website. And I'll show you where the portal is at the conclusion of the presentation. Okay, so I have taken care of the committee business, gone over some housekeeping items, and so I'm now going to turn the virtual camera over to Sally, who I mentioned is going to moderate our first topic and introduce our speakers. Sally, it's all yours now.
Thank you so much, Latanya. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We have folks from all over the world joining us today. It's my pleasure to introduce you to this first topic, Global Perspectives, the Regulatory Landscape and Challenges for Cultured Meat. Many of us know, especially in the regulatory and industry space, how challenging this area is for quality and safety. And I have some great speakers lined up today for you that can discuss this topic from both the regulatory perspective and the industry perspective. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. It's Dr. Benjamin Smith. Dr. Smith is a risk assessor, a toxicologist affiliated with the Agency for Science, Technology, and Research, ASTAR, which is Singapore's lead agency for scientific innovation. So he's joining us from around the globe today. His current research interests include the development of risk-benefit frameworks for novel foods and the integration of human relevant and socially responsible safety methodologies into the regulatory assessment process. So Dr. Smith, I will turn the floor to you to share your screen.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Just bear with me one moment. Hopefully everyone can see my screen, and I'll put it into presentation mode.
You're
And
good.
I'm more than happy to, sorry, let me turn this down so you're not seeing all the faces. More than happy to share my slides as well after. So if you don't pick everything up now, they'll be there to look at later. So I'm going to jump into it because those that know me know I have a habit of talking. It's a little bit of an Australian thing. But what I wanted to do today on this topic is just give you a little bit of an introduction to what's happening here in Singapore and what we're doing to prepare ourselves for bringing novel foods, but more specifically cultivated meats to market. And for those of you who have been following this space, you'll know that Singapore very much is leading at the moment in this space and is the first country to have brought cultivated meat to the table and to the market. So hang on, let me move to the next. So the reason that we're doing this in Singapore, like in a lot of countries, is very much because of food security. But in a country like Singapore, it's very particular because we're an island state, and greater than 90% of our food actually comes from imports. So we're very interested in looking at how these novel foods can provide a solution to future food security and future nutritional needs. And we have here a big program that is aimed at pushing this forward called the Singapore Food Story R&D program, or R&D agenda, which is looking at a number of different areas. We're not putting all our eggs in one basket, but a big amount of attention is going into the area of alternative proteins, at which for us, we feel cultivated meats is an important area, particularly because some of these other areas still require us to import materials, whereas with cultivated meats, it's something that we feel can be grown in a technological country like Singapore more readily. And so we're very interested in how to develop these new products, but equally, as the saying goes, there's no food security without food safety. And so what we've been looking at, and particularly with the organization I'm involved with, the Future Ready Food Safety Hub, is how do we bring these new novel technologies and particularly cultivated or cell-based meats to market. And so a lot of our attention at the moment is going into the food safety area. And the reason I put this slide up is that we definitely don't negate the fact that in any new foods and foods that are coming on the market, we still have to think about all of the classical food safety risks. But where we're also putting a lot of attention at the moment is potential emerging hazards that may arise with some of these new technologies. And that's one of the things that, for those of you who have seen and read the WHO document, and maybe some of you were also at the recent European Food Safety colloquium on cultivated or cell-based meats. There's this big discussion, right, between understanding these new processes with respect to the traditional food risks and how these new foods could actually be parts of those risks. So adulteration, for example, of insect proteins is a very big issue at the moment, versus are there actually specific unique issues that are coming on the market when it comes to novel foods, and particularly cellular meats, where a lot of the types of materials that are being used are a little bit different to what we would expect in the food chain. So this is where sort of Fresh formed. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but we are a government entity and a public-private partnership platform led by 3 agencies. So the Singapore Food Agency is our regulatory agency here in Singapore, and that they're responsible for the mandated safety assessments of all new foods coming on the market. As Sally said, I'm actually home-based with A-Star, which is our Science for Economics agency, and Fresh, we're embedded at Nanyang Technological University, which is one of our large semi-private / publicly funded universities. Okay, and really what we're trying to do in this space and under the Singapore food story is look at how to bridge the gap between regulation and technological change. And it's a really interesting space for those of you who are playing in the field of regulatory science in this space versus the extremely rapid rate of technological change in this particular space and development. And we talk about cell cultivated meats, and I think you're going to learn a little bit about that process. But what's really interesting is that there are so many different ways that companies are looking at bringing these cell-based meats to market. Different types of cell line technologies, different types of bioreactor technologies, and definitely different secret sources or chemical mixes of media. And we're seeing a whole lot of change, but what's really interesting from other historical areas is that there's a lot of discussion in this space. And particularly here in Singapore, with the way that we're set up, there's a lot of discussion between the regulators and the industry, which is helping us to try and lower this gap between the technological change and regulatory change curves. So sort of where are we at in Singapore? What have we been doing with regard to this process? And I think the key things, this is a fairly busy slide, but I think the key things to point out really are this huge increase that we've seen in cultivated meat companies following the approval of Eat Just Chicken, which I know has also gone recently through the US FDA and received a letter of no concern, and is sitting at the moment, of course, with still ongoing discussions with the USDA, Department of Agriculture. But since then, we've seen a huge increase in companies wanting to bring different types of products to market, but interestingly, also companies looking to develop tools and systems to support this industry. So we're seeing an increase in different types of companies developed to do toll manufacturing like Esco Ester, but also companies like Merck Millipore looking at new types of media components, and a number of companies that are also coming in to develop things like scaffolds and things to make these cell masses more meat-like and more product-like. And so it's really interesting to see how this space is growing. And we're expected to see this year probably 2, hopefully more cellular meat products coming out on market in 2023 here in Singapore. My discussions with colleagues in other zones is that we're likely also to see maybe something coming out in Australia through Food Standards Australia, New Zealand, and FDA are really giving Singapore a run for their money at the moment with the interest and the dossiers that are coming out there with Upside and Just and a few other companies starting to go to them as well. So what I'm going to do now and spend the rest of my time on, because I thought it could be of interest to you, is just give you a little bit of background of Singapore's regulatory framework for cultivated meat, and how we approach it, and the way that we're going. And I will say that there is so unlike in the US, where you have the grass process and you don't have a novel foods framework, we do have a defined novel foods framework, and it's broken down into different types of product areas or different types of processes. So we have particular guidelines for fermentation processes, and we're working on and also for cellular meats. But one of the things about Singapore and under our food safety law is that when it comes to the guidelines, we do have this flexibility and evolution. The guidelines can change as needed, as long as we're meeting the requirements of the weight of evidence safety assessment that are mandated as a part of our food law. And because of that, and because of this ability to have this interaction, and you can see in this first block, this pre-market safety assessment, this discussion, it's why we're seeing a lot of movement down here in Singapore with companies coming to market, because we are having this direct discussion and learning what's needed, and sharing information, which is really, really important to bridge this gap between the regulatory speed and the technological speed. So in broad pieces, the way it goes is we have companies need to provide the safety assessment, as in the case of the US. It's their responsibility, but that safety assessment then has to be legally approved or legally assessed by the SFA, Singapore Food Agency, who do a rigorous safety review based on the data that the companies put forward. And this can be done directly by the agency, or if there are specific areas of question, they will also bring in advice from their novel food safety expert group, which is a panel, it's a published panel of different expertise to look at some of the questions around cultivated meat. And so, again, a little bit like the US and a little bit different to Europe, we do not mandate specific types of tests, but we ask for specific information on endpoints such as genotoxicity. And so it's up to the company putting their product through to determine if they feel they have the right approach and information. But as pretty much all food safety approaches go, it's very much driven by understanding the components. Okay, so let's jump into this a little bit. So as I said, I think one of the key things for Singapore that has really driven the regulatory environment forward and made us take steps in this space is because we do have this pre-submission consultation, and hopefully these links work, these QR codes work. But what they will do is they'll take you to links to things like the Novel Food Virtual Clinic, which is actually more of a general clinic that they run to give information on the process and updates on the process. We also have guidelines, as I said, the latest as of 26th of September. They do get updated every now and then. And you can also come to organizations, either the SFA directly or Fresh. So Fresh was set up actually to help companies engage with the SFA and sort of do a triage. So just to let you know, Fresh, or the Future Ready Food Safety Hub, which I'm involved in, we do have consultancy services where we are helping a number of companies that are bringing their products to the Singapore market to look at what sort of data is needed and how to present that data to the SFA. And it's really interesting, as I said before, to see how much variation there actually is in the types of approaches that are being used for a number of these different types of cell meats. specifically with some meats, of course, being seafood, so cellular seafood, which has quite different culturing techniques to, say, beef. Some companies taking stem cells are the primary. So there's quite a lot of difference in this space of what people call cellular meats. So the type of data, this just gives you a little bit of an idea of the sort of type of data that we're looking for with regard to the different types of processes. And so what we tend to do is break things down with regard to processes associated with the development of cultivated meat. And we're looking at all of the sort of standard factors of understanding the cell line, how that cell line is adapted, and understanding what type of chemicals may be used, down to the level of, are they food grade, have they been used before, to if they're novel ingredients, is there sufficient data available on these types of ingredients? But also very much trying to understand where along this process certain things like contaminants and things can also come into the process. So a lot of attention in this whole process is also in the regulatory process is also being given to the HACCP processes and design, which is a little bit different for your typical chemical registration, as an example, or chemical dossier. What we're trying to really look at here is the whole process and potential areas of hazard. So this diagram actually I've taken directly from the FAO document and the FAO expert group document. Personally, I think there are some things missing from this, but it gives you a general overview of some of the key areas that are being looked at and how we should be looking at it. And so, as I said, the approach that we take is very much breaking it down into the different process stages and then looking at what information we need on those particular stages. And very much driving it by a component analysis approach. And so we're putting a lot of our attention actually into understanding what makes up the culture media for many of these materials and trying to take what we would call an exposure-based weighting approach. And I think that's one of the interesting things in this space when it comes to cultivated meats, is that we do know what we're putting into these formulations. We do know what we're putting into the products, and we can get a lot of information on that. And so that really lends itself to doing this component analysis and understanding the levels. And it's really, I think, heartening to see how a number of the regulatory agencies like SFA have taken on concepts like the threshold of toxicological concern to support assessment of these materials. And interestingly enough, it also came out at the recent EFSA colloquium, where where there was a general consensus and agreement that maybe we can even get away from some of the higher tiered tests like a 28-day study if we have good information on the components, if we can use data and exposure-based weighting approaches. Okay, so it then comes to very much the review of the safety assessment data. As I said, we don't give a prescription as to what that data should entail. But if you click on that QR code before, we do give a list of endpoints and hazards we want information on. And we ask for a weight of evidence assessment. So it's really up to the company submitting to say, okay, we think we have enough information. We think that this is important. What we've found, though, of course, with our approach is that because we can have this ongoing discussion across the pre-market safety assessment stage, we do tend to have quite a long pre-market safety assessment with many of these dossiers, where the companies are talking quite regularly to either Fresh, and we're relaying it, or working with the SFA or with SFA directly, looking at what we're doing, because we're still all learning in this space. We're still trying to understand what are the best approaches. And so we're looking at how to refine some of that data. How do we best look at cell line stability as an example? Is it transcriptomics, which there's a lot of questions as to really how useful that is? Is it phenotypic markers, which is a lot more similar to what we would be doing, say, with a piece of traditional meat. And so there's still a lot of discussion in this space, and that's where this ongoing discussion around the dossiers is also helpful. But it's very much focused on really understanding the endpoints and taking a little bit from the GRASS approach as well, this concept also of substantial equivalence. How similar is it? So very much from the protein perspective of these cellular meats, they are very similar to other types of proteins. And I think I don't know if I'm getting a call for timing, they also very much sorry, I've lost my way. So if the proteins are similar to what's in the traditional meat, but then we also, how we're growing them is can be different. Okay, so regulatory compliance, as I said, looking at chemical requirements, microbial, and even things like labeling requirements, which is an interesting one because just to give you an example, we have some products where we're seeing coming on the market where they're using scaffolds made out of wheat and soy, and they're going into beef products. And as we all know, soy and wheat are some important allergens that normally you wouldn't expect to hit with meat, but because of the presence of these scaffolds in cellular meat, their levels can be quite high. So there are some differences here that we do need to take into account. Okay, and then this is more just about licensing and product development of the factories. So I'll skip over this. And then the final part is that that we found particularly here in Singapore, but I think we're seeing it globally, right? Is that whatever effort we're putting into this space, we also need to make sure that we're really communicating about what's being done. And in this fast moving space of cellular meats, that communication is key. We need to really make sure that in addition to moving forward the science, we are educating properly on what we're really doing here, both on the benefits and the risks. And that's something that's quite different and a little bit foreign here in Singapore. Everything is risk-based, but this industry is very much driven by the benefits and how can we actually weigh up those benefits against the potential risks and help support this industry to bring these products safely to market. Of course, we can't just do that in Singapore. We need to be doing that on a global basis. And so opportunities like this to share is always very valuable to us. And I appreciate how the time to quickly have gone through this information and shared with you tonight. So on that note, I'll wind up. Hopefully I wasn't too long. Hopefully I've given you a little bit of a background of what we're doing in Singapore, and more than happy to answer any questions when the opportunity arises, or if you'd like to email us, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Smith. That was really engaging. Loving these topics, especially the emphasis on risk education. I think that's really important. We could listen to you for much longer, so I apologize that we're crunched for time today, but we will have a Q&A at the end for everyone who just joined. Please feel free to put your questions to Dr. Smith and any of other speakers in the chat. Just a reminder, we'll have some time at the end to address. With that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Brian Yan. So Brian currently serves as the national expert for the FDA Office of Regulatory Affairs, ORA, and is the ORA team lead in the FDA USDA transfer of jurisdiction and inspectional programs. In addition to this work, Brian's also a subject matter expert for inspections, including preventative controls for human foods, aseptic processing, low acid canned foods, and acidified foods. So I will pass it on to Brian. Thank you for joining us today.
All right. Thank you very much. Let me get this up and running. Let me know if you can see the screen, and we should be good to go.
Yep, we're good.
All right. Perfect. So great opening presentation. I thought, a lot of the information in there was relevant. I'll try not to rehash some of the very key points, because there's a lot of similarities across regulatory agencies and how we're approaching cell cultured foods. So just wanted to give you background overall. There are, as we touched already, lots of domestic and international firms, and domestic, here in the US, and international firms moving towards commercializing these types of food products. And what we're seeing is really the interaction between bioprocessing and food science, and the combination of those two sciences coming together to promote and develop products that are for human consumption. Industry, of course, is moving very rapidly towards lowering their costs and scaling up production, and we're seeing lots of movement in that space, both from things like optimizing media to increasing pilot scale bioreactors and various changes to optimize that process. So back in 2018, FDA and FSIS had a public meeting on the topic and discussed how cell cultured foods and cell cultured meat in particular was going to be regulated by the two agencies. And they came to an agreement, which is posted on our website in 2019. And that agreement really focuses on where the coordinated oversight is going to be. And within FDA and USDA, that oversight is really going to occur at the point of harvest. And I'll touch base on that real quick. So where we are today is really looking at how these firms, how these facilities that are in that research and development phase are really focusing on the nutrient media and trying to eliminate some of the growth factors, maybe some of the serums, just kind of drive down costs and drive up harvesting and volume and production, because really getting to scale is where that operation needs to be. So there's a lot of optimization going on. As these companies are manufacturing, they may be combining one or more lines into a finished or a semi-finished product. And those semi-finished products, tend to touch base a little bit on the new allergens that we were mentioning a little previously, where we were talking about the types of hazards that typically you wouldn't consider with meat products. But as you're increasing the formulations and changing the scaffolding materials, you may be introducing different types of allergens into the process. So those semi-finished products and how that interacts with the existing cellular material is really where the food science portion of manufacturing comes in to be, where you're combining all those different components into a food product. So cell culture itself really is driving both from biomedical technologies, and we see this in a lot of our pharmacy and medical products type of operations, and a lot of best practices in biomanufacturing. And then the food production technologies, very similar to fermentation, but just at a very different scale with very different controls and very different media inputs. So companies are continuing their development of supporting technologies, again, optimizing that nutrient media. And they're moving really from this research and development phase into pilots and prototypes. So they're beginning to scale up bioreactors, going from benchtop operations to different sized bioreactors, increasing that volume, increasing that efficiency, and eventually collecting more material for consumption or for combinations into finished product. And as they're increasing those bioreactors, they're moving from pilot scale more towards manufacturing scales. And then the other options that we're really starting to see is how companies are beginning to collect that cellular material and then forming some sorts of structures. So structurings either through scaffolding and scaffolding materials. And that's where you input different types of allergen possibilities into a matrix for some sort of form that these cells can adhere to. And even companies, looking at 3D printing as a possibility, probably a couple generations downstream, but still looking at the idea. And the goal all along is to go from these pilots and prototypes and then to get through the regulatory hurdles that they have to approach, both through their country's regulatory scheme and in some cases our regulatory scheme, to get to those test and regional markets where a product can actually get out on the market. So this is a complicated slide and just wanted to talk about the process overview and really wanted to focus on a couple key points about the transfer of jurisdiction between FDA and USDA. If you look in the upper left corner, we got cell procurement and qualification. So this is everything related to tissue collection and the formation of the tissue bank, collecting those cells, getting a master cell bank, generating a working cell bank, and working on that proliferation. And as you increase those production cell banks, your proliferation with your typical food additives, your vitamins and sugars and fats and minerals and amino acids, gets supplemented with different food additives. And this is just a couple examples of what may go into media formulations. Hormones or signaling molecules or growth factors, which are typically not GRAS or generally recognized as safe food ingredients. And all of those are really used for proliferation. As those media inputs come into the fold, they may be combined with scaffolding materials, plant-derived components, 3D cellular matrices or recombinant microbes to kind of form that scaffold, which allows the cells something to adhere to and to give form, and then may move to differentiation. Finally, we get to this cellular material that's available for converting into a finished food product. And this is really where that line between FDA and USDA occurs. Everything kind of to the, moving around to the counterclockwise here, this is all considered upstream processing. And it's all about generating the cells and allowing the cells to grow and differentiate until you get to the point of harvest. And that point of harvest is similar to a slaughter step, and where the traditional transfer of jurisdiction between FDA and USDA is taken over. So after that cellular material has been isolated, proliferated, grown, up to that point of harvesting, that point of transfer of jurisdiction is going to be handed either to FDA or USDA based on the species of the food product. So we'll have that dual jurisdiction really related to amiable species for USDA and FSIS. And after that material is collected, we collect that material, move downstream and to go into post-harvest processing, and then into conventional food processing, eventually to manufacture a finished food product. So we've got kind of the upstream processing, the point of harvest, and then downstream processing. So obviously it gives us new regulatory challenges. We've got issues with identity of the starting material, the chemical safety, which is really related to the media inputs. And the good thing that we were already discussing is the amount of knowledge that we have based on what is going into those growth medias. So we've got a little background, a little more information to kind of understand what those chemical hazards are. We've got microbial safety concerns, and some of these are traditional for downstream processing, where we think of our routine microbiological concerns, salmonella, listeria, and E. coli. But we also have upstream processing concerns, where we may be considering the types of viruses or mycoplasmas or other things that may be issues that lead to contamination in the upstream processing stream. So all of those lead to regulatory challenges in how the agencies, either under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, the Federal Meat Inspection Act, or the Poultry Products Inspection Act, implement those changes based on the species of the animal cells that are being grown. So just an overview of our roles and responsibilities. Both FDA and USDA FSIS jointly oversee those food products. FSIS covers, livestock and includes catfish and poultry. FDA is covering products that are outside of those. So things, for example, that are seafood, or things that are exotic species that are not necessarily under the FMIA or the PPIA Act. And that coverage, again, is up at to that point of harvest. So FDA is really overseeing the upstream processing. And until that point of harvest, we hand over that jurisdiction to USDA. And we also are looking at how we're considering products both for human consumption and also foods that we may downstream be used for animal consumption, for animal feeds. Similar to what's going on in Singapore, FDA is conducting pre-market consultations, and those consultations are being performed to evaluate both the production materials, the methods, the manufacturing controls, how the cell banks themselves are established, so the master cell banks and the working cell banks, how they are stored, how they're harvested, and what those components and inputs are. And those components and inputs are primarily being reviewed by our Office of Food Additive Safety, which is looking at all those non-traditional materials that are used in the growth media to promote and select for cellular growth. Those consultations between FDA and USDA are shared to allow that FSIS to make regulatory decisions based on FDA's evaluations, considering products that fall under FSIS jurisdiction. So for those involving livestock and poultry cell lines, we share our information with FSIS to allow them to discuss any concerns that the agencies may have between them. So again, just to kind of summarize, we've got that coordinated oversight all the way up to harvest. And harvest is kind of an interesting terminology because it's similar to slaughter. It's the point at which we're going to collect that cellular material, but there may be inputs during harvest that FDA would be interested in evaluating. For example, if there are different medias that are used to extract or remove cellular material from bioreactors. That could be an area where the jurisdiction is a little, is also shared as well. But we transfer that information, again, to FSIS and help them determine whether or not that material itself is eligible for a mark of inspection. So this is a really quick summary slide. And again, I don't want to run too long and run into the USDA, Dr. Haney's presentation. So we can look real quickly at what that is, but primarily FDA's roles and responsibilities are everything related to upstream processing, and that's everything from the design and establishment of the master cell bank, the media inputs, and all the way up into the point of harvest. If those food products do not fall under USDA jurisdiction, FDA will cover all points in processing from the upstream manufacturing through harvest into downstream processing. So a couple of resources for you. There's the formal agreement, and public meeting pages are available on FDA's website. We also have our inventory of pre-marketed consultations. And as our consultations are moving through the regulatory process, we post information about them, and there are two up there right at the moment. And then also I wanted to just kind of give these email addresses for questions, and there's two separate ones that are listed down here. One is for questions related to animal cell culture for human foods, And the bottom link is for cell culture related to animal foods. And really the difference that you'll see kind of is this pre-market link down here at the bottom that will give you a little more information and get more of the focus of the questions that may go towards CVM rather than to FDA. I will pause there and let Sally take it back.
Thank you so much, Brian. That was a great overview from FDA. I really appreciate the resources as well. I'm sure other folks in this call are very grateful for that. Without further ado, I'll also like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Haney Sidrak from the USDA. He is the Deputy Assistant Administrator for the USDA Food Safety and Inspection Services Office of Field Operations. We're very happy to have him join us. He plays a critical role in guiding our OFO district offices that oversee more than 6,800 geographically dispersed plants to ensure that meat, poultry, and processed egg products are inspected for safety and quality. And in addition to domestic and exported products, Dr. Sidrak leads the inspection for products to ensure that public health is protected both locally and internationally. So very appropriate for our international committee doc today. So Dr. Sidrak, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Sally, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, depending on the part of the world you're listening to us today, and thank you for joining us. I wanted to add a little bit to clarification to the role of inspection in the United States. It has a unique system that's a little bit different, as you heard from Brian, that FSIS has been working with FDA to ensure that we are providing an inspection as the cellular cultured food products are coming into play now in the United States. So the human food products derived from the cells of animals amenable to the Federal Meat Inspection Act and the Poultry Products Inspection Acts are under FSI's jurisdiction. That's the Food Safety and Inspection Service, one of the agencies under the United States Department of Agriculture. Again, on March 7th, 2019, both FSIS and FDA entered into a formal agreement to jointly oversee the production of the human food products derived from the cells of livestock and poultry. So under this agreement, FDA oversees the collection, growth, and the differentiation of living cells into various cell types, such as proteins and fats. FDA and FSIS has been coordinating transfer of oversight to FSIS at the cell harvest stage.
Sorry,
So
Dr.
FSIS,
Sidrak, sorry to interrupt. Are you sharing your screen at the moment?
no, I have not prepared the slide, but
Oh,
I
perfect.
could,
That's
I
fine.
could do that. Let me see if I
No
could.
need to share. It's okay. I just
Okay.
wanted to make sure we weren't missing anything.
I appreciate it. And I do have one slide that I didn't send to you, but I could certainly, as I speak, I'll see if I could just share one slide, perhaps to help the audience keep track of. But thank you. So FSIS will ensure that any establishment that produces, packages, or labels cell cultured meat and poultry products obtains a USDA grant of inspection as required by our regulations. And FSIS will also conduct inspections in such establishments and oversee labeling of cell cultured meat and poultry products to ensure that they are safe, wholesome, and accurately labeled. Meat and poultry products derived from cells of food animals amenable to the FMIA, the Meat and Poultry Inspection Act, as I mentioned earlier, are under our jurisdiction in FSIS. So that's why they really, those establishments would need to apply for a grant of inspection. So we'll definitely in FSIS will consider all applications for the grants from firms seeking to produce these types of products, cell cultured products. and within our existing procedures. So we haven't developed any specific process for that that's different from other applications. So we will issue an FSIS grants of inspection to firms that successfully complete the FDA pre-market consultation and meet all FSIS requirements. Other than new labeling regulations, FSIS does not intend to propose any new food safety regulations pertaining to the production of cell-cultured meat and poultry. Current FSIS regulations requiring sanitation and hazard analysis and critical control point systems to be completed and immediately applicable, and sufficient to ensure those safety of those products, cell-cultured meat and poultry products. So I just want to briefly talk, generally speaking, about that grant of inspection process, because to produce FSIS regulated products in the United States, a firm must apply and receive that grant of inspection prior to putting products into commerce. So there are several requirements to receive the grant of inspection, including passing a background check, submitting food safety plans, mentioned the sanitation standard operating procedures, the HACCP recall plans, and submitting any labels that need approval by USDA prior to production. So inspection personnel for FSIS would review these food safety plans and work with the establishment to ensure that their plans are sufficient to control hazards which might render food unsafe or unwholesome. They are also typically walk through the facilities to ensure that the food produced on the premises is safe and wholesome. The amount of time that it takes to get a grant of inspection varies from establishment to another and is dependent on FSIS being able to verify that the establishment's facilities and food safety system and producers will produce safe, wholesome, and properly labeled product. Therefore, it's not possible to set a timeline at the beginning of that application process. For the labeling part, I just want to point out that on September 2021, FSIS published an advance notice of rulemaking to seek public comments to inform future regulatory requirements for ensuring the cell-cultured meat and poultry products are accurately labeled. And FSIS now is currently evaluating those comments, including survey information submitted in response to that advance notice, and intends to develop a proposed rule. The proposed rule projected publication date will also be included in our regulatory agenda as we move forward, so our constituents are updated and are aware. And this is obviously because neither industry or consumers have experience with the cell-cultured products or their labels. But cell-cultured meat and poultry product labels are not eligible for generic type approval in FSIS, and FSIS will need to review and approve all labels before they are used in product and commerce. Producers will need to submit those labels to FSIS first to ensure compliance with our regulations before finalizing. But it may be pointing out that during that label review process, where essentially FSIS is keen to ensure that the labels are clearly differentiating cell-cultured products from slaughtered meat and poultry products, and ensure that the labels bear all mandatory features in our regulations. So all establishments producing cell-cultured meat and poultry product will need their product labels approved by FSIS before actually bringing their products to market. So any establishment or company that's interested in producing or applied for a USDA grant of inspection, we would not really finalize an issue before we have an approved label from FSIS. So for establishment that received the grant of inspection and market cell cultured meat and poultry product before that rulemaking is complete, we'll do that approval, you know, on a one-to-one basis. So we're not holding back any interested companies, establishments in moving forward, you know, before finalizing that rule, because again, we can't really in the US predict that it will how the process goes and how long it will take to finalize that rule. But but definitely for the review of an approved label, we typically conclude that within a week, 5-day working days, essentially. So that pretty much concludes what I intended to highlight, and hopefully that will help completing the picture that Brian has started. So back to you, Sally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sujak. That was very interesting, very helpful information. I know I always get a lot of questions about, you know, USDA process and things and direct them. So this really helps to have some of that overview. Yeah, so the next speaker here today is our last speaker, Dr. Luke Groschel. He will be coming from the industry perspective. He's the regulatory lead on the Millipore Sigma life science business of Merck KGaA Darmstadt, Germany, cultured meat team. He also leads the global team of regulatory experts responsible for flavors and fragrances, food ingredients, food and beverage testing, among many other things. He brings over 20 years in chemical manufacturing, marketing, quality, and regulatory experience to the table, and he's here to talk to you about the industry perspective. So on to you, Luke.
Thank you, Sally. Let me share my screen here. Just one moment. Can we see that okay?
Yep, you're good.
Excellent. How are we doing on time, Sally?
Yep, thank you for the check, Luke. Yeah, so I guess if you could take us for about 10 minutes or so, and then
Sure
we'll jump
thing.
into the Q&A. Thank you.
Absolutely. So thank you, Sally, and thank you to the previous speakers. That was very helpful. I hope a nice introduction to this. As Sally said, I'm going to present this from the industry perspective and really look at the raw materials. So first of all, do have to share a little bit of a complicated nature about our organization. So Merck KGaA Darmstadt, Germany holds the rights to the name Merck internationally, except for US and Canada. So those joining us from outside the US or Canada probably know us as Merck, but in US and Canada, we are Millipore Sigma. So in the US and Canada, we operate as EMD Serono in the healthcare business, Millipore Sigma in the life science business, and EMD Electronics in the high-tech materials business. But for myself, I'll be presenting from Millipore Sigma. And just a quick picture, previous speakers already touched on this, but myself looking at the cultured meat or business, you know, it's really kind of a 4 steps. You can think the cell extraction, the cell banking, this very complicated piece, probably the biggest piece of the cell propagation, although these all have their complexities, and then the tissue cultivation. So if we look at this process, and this is from the Good Food Institute provided this as kind of a overview of or a little snapshot of the different parts of these process. There's a lot of inputs that come into this, from And that's where an organization like Millipore Sigma gets involved, is saying, how can we feed into this industry, and how can we support, and where can we look at where we feed in this industry, and what we want to understand about the requirements, the regulatory requirements, the safety requirements, and at the same time, we feel from our experience might be some of the best approaches. And I'm going to narrow in on a few areas where ourselves as an organization interact. There's the cell culture media, there's the cell banking, and the bioreactors. These are some of the more complex areas. So what we're looking at is, certainly this is a new technology. It's been presented. There's a lot of new challenges, safety and regulatory complications. So really at the end, the approach that we've taken, that I've heard the previous speakers have taken, is, consumer safety is the primary concern. Primary concern is food safety. However, food safety, when we look at this traditionally, it's based and evaluated on existing precedent. And since this is very new technology, there's not always the precedent we can take for food. But fortunately, a lot of this technology is similar to what we see in the biopharma industry. So we can look to that for some existing precedent. But of course, overall in food, there's often this hazard-based approach to food safety. So we can look at what might be a hazard-based approach to some of these raw materials, the cell lines, the media, and the bioreactors. And if we start thinking about the cell lines themselves, I think one of the questions that often comes up is the genetic modification. A lot of the methods we see say it's not required, but some are looking that this may be used. But I think from a regulatory perspective, this is not as challenging as some of the other areas, basically because there's already a very good precedent for evaluating GMO. This is established in many regulatory agencies and already established for look at introducing new genetic species, genetically modified cells into the food chain. So, that existing standards can be used. Some of the other areas concerned is, once the cells are extracted, you have the cell banking. In each of these methods, that those cell banks, these are very precious to the cultured industry. Every time before a process is started, they are tested. I really think the stability of the cell lines, I call sort of a self-limiting step. If that cell line stability is lost, if that stability starts to be broken down, it simply stops the process before it begins. From the cultured meat companies, they're going to concentrate on maintaining that stability. But I think from a general regulatory approach, it's acknowledged that existing cell line must be maintained, the stability must be maintained, and that pre-production testing must be established to maintain that. But I really wouldn't consider the cell line stability a particular food safety risk, because once that instability is found, there simply is shut down and there is no production. That is not introduced into the production line, then ultimately into the food supply chain. Looking at some of the other elements, as Millipore Sigma, we have a strong footprint into bioreactors for biopharma. So thinking about how those same types of materials can be introduced to the food safety for the food industry. And certainly with any sort of cellular production, sanitation is absolutely critical. It's, again, I'd say a self-limiting step, that if the reactor itself becomes unsanitary, that it simply is going to shut down the cell production. We're going to get incorrect cell production. So maintaining pristine sanitation within bioreactors is really extremely important. But there's a lot of precedent that can be drawn from this, not only from the biopharma industry, but within traditional fermentation methods. But since this is a novel industry, there may be novel bioreactors, certainly novel for food manufacturing. Fortunately, again, a lot of these can be translated over from the biopharma industry, where there are well-established both standards and methods for evaluating potential routes of concern into the safety of the product. So not only maintaining that sanitation, but the risk of they may have leaching or extractables from the bioreactor media makeup itself, particularly if you go to away from something like a stainless steel reactor to a polymer-based reactor. And here, there are ISO standards for that the biopharma industry uses. We would see that those same standards should be applied to the food production for culture meat. There might be some need to modify those or tweak those in some way if the environments under which the cultured meat are manufactured vary considerably from what we already see in biopharma. But I think there'll be a similarity of methods looking towards evaluation of the safety of those bioreactors. But I want to spend a little bit more time talking about the cell culture media, because as has already been mentioned, it does involve a lot of materials that are unique, at least in food. They have not been evaluated for food. I mean, the basic makeup of the media, you're going to have small molecules, sugars, you're going to have nutrients, amino acids, you're going to have just some inorganics, some buffers, salts in there, as well as some growth factors. And in many cases, these do not have a precedent for use in food manufacturing. And also, when I think considering this, where we're introducing unique materials that could have an impact on the food safety, the concern really is, could components of that media carry over into the end food? Because this is such a novel now industry, there's just limited information. And certainly one could consider that we take at the point of cell harvesting and that final food product test for the presence of any of these inputs. What had already been mentioned is, with cultured meat, we know all the inputs going into the food, but that testing is not always straightforward. Some of the components like inorganics, it's relatively straightforward to test for heavy metals in food, but certainly some of the small molecules or the growth factors might be very difficult to discern a very viable test for the end material. So how can we approach then the cell culture media safety? And I think there we have to look at the different types of components that may go into that media. So I'd say if the components are known food additives, something that's a known gross material that has a known established safety level in food, then I think the approach is fairly straightforward. We can even take a very risk-based approach and just say, let's assume 100% of that component gets carried over into the end meat. We have, we could evaluate the safety compared to that as a traditional food additive. And if we just find that based on the amount in the media and the propagation of the cells, that it would still be present in a safe level with 100% carryover, I'd say there really isn't any concern. And however, if we do see that based on the concentration there is in the media and the yield of the media, that it could potentially be some risk. There, ideally you could do testing, or certainly during the process, there are wash steps between the cell propagation and the actual tissue collection. So again, can we test that wash solution to verify the amount of residual material? And we've seen, part of this is there's the wash, there could be a secondary wash with a rinse to verify that that wash is successful in removing any unwanted residual material. I'd also just note, what we would expect is as the technology will keep increasing yield, the risk from carryover gets lower and lower as that concentration in the end product would be then, expect to get lower and lower. But if we move away from known food additives, we get into some space where we have materials that might not have a precedent in food, but could have a precedent in feed or pharma. These both have particular approaches that can be taken, particularly with pharma grade materials, where again, a safety precedent in food is known. Feed materials, of course, feed has different safety standards than food, but feed grade materials, the components that are known and used in the feed industry still have some significant regulatory advantages that they would still come from an environment that has appropriate GMP for feed manufacturing and has appropriate hazard controls. There's also, one can look at analogous food grade ingredients. One example I give here is if we take a component like ferric nitrate that's in some of the cultured media for cultured meat. Ferric nitrate itself is not a recognized food additive, but different ferric salts are, different nitrate salts are. Ferric nitrate in the media solution is going to dissociate to ferric ions and nitrate ions. So one can look at that as an established baseline for the food safety, for looking at the intended use, the concentration, and interpolate and basically interpret that over into the end media end product to consider if that would be a safe level. Other items that might be added to the media, lipoic acid, I give as an example, again, do not have an established food additive or GRAS status, but are known to be in muscle cells, meats that are consumed. So one can look at something like lipoic acid that might be in the media and consider what's is that concentration then in the end food, similar to what exists in a traditional food. So if you're making cultured chicken, is your level of that component going to be analogous to that level of the component in in a natural chicken? Particularly, is it going to be the same or less than in that level? There should still be some look at the raw materials, though. So one of the challenges is going to be if these do not have an accepted food additive or GRAS basis, they're probably just not available in the marketplace as a food grade material. So one should look at other appropriate for human use products to make sure they have the proper GMP and other elements on there. See your head popping up. We might be running a little bit short on time. I'll just quickly state where we see no analogies in food or media. That's where we have to take, I think, much more focused approach on more of a traditional look at qualifying those materials for use in food, doing an analysis, establishing a GRAS basis for those materials, and through the cell culture or through the culture meat manufacturing, really establish that there is no risk or limited risk to the carryover of those materials. So I'll just wrap up real quick and do want to base, the media is one of the highest cost components we're looking at in cell culture media or culture meat production, and this is really at the development scale at this. So culture media are still undergoing optimization. So a risk-based approach to every one of the components should be taken to understand, to be able to both support this industry as well to continue to look at the consumer safety, the food safety. So I'll wrap up there, open it up, or I know we'll have a chance for questions afterwards, and I will share this presentation with after the post. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Luke. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all our speakers too. Really, really great information. I think we could go on for all day for all of these topics. So really grateful for your time and patience with us while we're navigating our schedule here. But I think we're going to steal, maybe I have one question that I think I'll ask each of our presenters. It's a single question. And if each of you could put your cameras on if you're comfortable and just kind of respond your thought on this topic, because then I want to make sure that our next topic session has some time. But the question that I have, that's kind of a summary of a couple questions I had from folks, is when working together as industry and regulators, and also working as regulators internationally, right? If you work with other international regulatory bodies, what is one of the most important areas of communication or collaboration, in your opinion? So I'll start with Dr. Smith, since you were our first speaker, and we'll just go in that order.
Yeah, no, I think you've sort of said it in your question a little bit. It's communicating and sharing and of the learning. And I think that one of the biggest challenges in this space is that things are changing very quickly, and some of the technologies that we were assessing at the beginning are not the same as what's being done now, just because it's being driven forward quickly. And so if we don't share that information and share our learnings, we're always going to be chasing the tail of the dog. And so I think that definitely being open and upfront and putting on the table is the way to go. And it was interesting that we're seeing a lot of that more at the European food safety colloquium, where in the past, let's be honest, in Europe, you would have never, in US and Singapore, we talk a lot more with the industry, you would have never had that sort of thing happening. In the novel food space, we're seeing it. So I think we're slowly moving there.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Brian, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what Dr. Smith said as well about communication. I mean, we see so much variation across applications that are coming in, manufacturing changes. Companies, again, are optimizing both the media and the cell lines themselves. There's different adaptations going on. And I think it's really a point of how fast the industry is moving and how nimble agencies need to be. And communication, I think, is going to be key to that.
Thank you. Yes, well said. Dr. Sidrak?
Yes, absolutely agree with my colleagues and your comments. I would just add that even though we talked about all the interactions so far, and obviously we've been extremely, I guess, fortunate in the US with the, have that common understanding between FDA and FSS. This really has worked very good for us. We communicate on a regular basis. I just want to also say that we've seen plans that will become innovative in what type of implementation process they have. So it's really hard to say that, okay, well, all plans will actually have under the same roof the entire process that's a dual jurisdiction, part under USDA, part under FDA, and then USDA. You may have a product that actually be taken after harvest and then go to further processing in another facility. Different scenarios. So the communication needs to be ongoing and to address all those scenarios that we may be having to discuss with people, and they need to know what's the current thinking and what's the best scenario, as well as communicating with the public through our rulemaking process. So that really, I guess, goes to the heart of your question. It's a very good question. Thank you.
I love that. Thank you. And Luke.
Thank you, Sally. I'll address what I agree. Communication between industry and the regulatory agencies is key. I think one of the challenges, though, with that communication is how to balance an open dialogue with industry with the need for industry to maintain their intellectual property. We see a well-established means for this, say on the pharma industry, where typically things go in through like a drug master file, which is a discussion between the developer and the regulatory agency, but that's not necessarily public, and competitors or others cannot see that, so that the industry can have an open dialogue with regulators and still protect their IP. Food regulations are different. That's often very open. We see all like the GROS dossiers and such are open. So actually, it's more, I think, a request to the regulators to consider how can we establish that sort of process that in the food realm that will also promote this open dialogue with the industry, while at the same time understanding that the industry really is looking to protect their intellectual property, protect the things like what are even like the components of their media or their development of specific cell lines or reactors, because this is going to be the key for those industries to bring their they're all for-profit industries. Ultimately, this is what they're going to need to do, protect their IP and bring a product to market.
Thank you, Luke. No, thank you, everyone. Thank you to all our speakers. If I get any other questions, I may still send them your way from the chat, but I do want to give our other topic some time. So thank you again, Luke, Dr. Smith, Dr. Cedrak, Brian, thank you so much for joining us today, and everyone who joined for the Culture Meet session. I'm now going to pass it to my co-moderator today, Julie Melia from the Department of Michigan, Department of Agriculture in Michigan, and I will pass it on to you. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sid. Thank you. Thank you, Sally. Hello, welcome to Food Traceability Final Rule. Requirements for additional traceability records for certain foods, FSMA Section 204. My name is Julie Melia. I am a food inspector with the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, Northwest Region. It is my honor to introduce our speaker, Alida Flores from FDA. Alida Flores is a compliance officer, SME, FSVP, Special Projects and DFPG liaison. Alida Flores is currently a subject matter expert, compliance officer for the FDA Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, Office of Compliance. She joined FDA in 2002 as an investigator with the Office of Regulatory Affairs and became a compliance officer in 2008. She has worked on both import and domestic regulatory areas for the Southwest Import District and San Francisco District Office before joining FSSANOC in 2005. She served as a co-lead for the subgroup on implementation and enforcement for the FSMA work group for food traceability and continues to contribute on the implementation work group as a subject matter expert. During the presentation, you can enter questions into the chat. Please join me in welcoming Alida Flores.
Thank you, Julie. Can I get a sound check? Can everyone hear me okay?
Sound good.
Okay, great. There has been some odd things with the FDA remote connection, so in California. So hopefully when I start sharing my screen, nothing will go wonky. Let me see here. I want to share this window. So as soon as someone can see the slides, let me know. Nothing yet?
Nothing yet.
Okay. Still nothing, huh? Okay.
So, oh, it just
came up.
popped in.
Okay, great. So let's see how we do. So again, my name's Alita Flores. I've been with CIFSAN for quite a few years. I've been a subject matter expert for a little while, and I think I'm well suited for this presentation to your group. I have a lot of experience in both imports and domestic with FDA, and I've been working on the work group, writing the rule, and now I'm going to continue to work on implementing the rule. And I think that your group is interested in, it looks like based on your name, International and Government Relations Committee. So looking at how food traceability rule will impact those areas of industry as well as our partner regulators. And let's see, I'm going to, here we go. So first of all, thank you for inviting us to present to your educational conference. It's good to know that there's interest in the rule, first of all, and I'm glad we can share this well-developed presentation of a material. It explains and describes the rule in an easy to understand format. And at the end, we'll also describe where there are additional resources to help you further explore and understand the requirements of the food traceability rule and when and how they apply. So hopefully you'll see the next slide. Can anyone just give me a verbal and let me know that
Good.
you okay.
Good.
I have this, like, post-traumatic, trauma from previous presentations. So thank you for that. Okay, so to start out, we want to give you a high-level overview of the food traceability rule and what it will require. The food traceability final rule establishes new record-keeping requirements for persons who manufacture, process, pack, or hold certain foods. Those which are on a list called the food traceability list. The additional record-keeping requirements are necessary to help FDA rapidly and effectively identify and remove potentially contaminated food from the marketplace. The final rule covers the entire food supply chain, including retail food establishments, restaurants, and farms, and applies to domestic firms as well as foreign firms producing food for U.S. consumption. So this slide here gives an overview of the exemptions in the rule. The full list of exemptions is stated obviously in the final rule. The exemptions here are summarized and grouped together in little neat packages. But we want to note that some of the things that are listed here are partially exempt, some are fully exempt, and so it depends on what you're looking at here. So the final rule obviously is your best source. I'm not going to walk through each of these exemptions today, but you can see that there are several groupings of exemptions, and that's what the intent of this slide is. It includes like some of the small entities under different groupings, and then depending on if there's certain types of processing going on for that supply chain, and of course, food transporters are not included as well. And although I said something about each of these areas, I didn't cover entirely. But the full list of exemptions, obviously in the rule, and then this next slide we have here, we've created an exemptions tool. So it's an online tool. So if you go to our website, you'll see this online tool. It's here to help you determine whether an exemption to the rule may apply to you or in a particular situation. So this screenshot is just what it looks like when you first get there. And it'll take you, once you use the tool, it'll take you step by step through the exemptions in the final rule, and you'll answer questions, and it provides information about whether a particular situation means an entity is fully exempt from the rule, partially exempt, or not exempt at all. And again, you can access this tool through our final rule, food traceability final rule webpage, which I hope at the end of this, depending on how much time we have, I can demonstrate a couple of the things because we have that resource page like I mentioned. Okay, so this is the food traceability list. So these are the foods that are on the food traceability list. The rule applies only to the foods on this list. And there's a lot of misconception about that, but the rule and the requirements, the additional keeping requirements applies only to the foods that'll be on this list. It also covers, though, foods that contain these listed foods as ingredients, as long as the ingredient is in the same form as what is on this list. This list may change over time. We plan on, depending on the risk ranking model results, and we plan on updating the list every 5 years or so. If you look on our website, you'll see descriptions for each of these commodities, including examples of the foods that are or not considered part of each of these certain commodity designations. And hopefully some of you are familiar with this. Generally, there's cheese, soft cheese, shell eggs, nut butters, cucumber, fresh herbs. So we have designations in fresh. Melons, peppers, sprouts, tomatoes, tropical tree fruits, fresh cut vegetables, fin fish, smoked fin fish, crustaceans, molluscan shellfish, and ready to eat deli salads. And all of this is based on the risk ranking model. So there are some additional things to know about whether a food is covered by the rule. For example, for foods that are specified as fresh on the food traceability list, it's only the fresh version of the commodity that is covered by the final rule. For example, fresh melons or fresh herbs. If a food that is designated on the food traceability list as fresh is used in its fresh form as part of a multi-ingredient food, then that multi-ingredient food would also be covered under the final rule. For example, this is a very good example, bagged salad mix contains fresh lettuce, or a prepared sandwich that might contain fresh tomatoes. Those would be covered. And if you think about it, you're tracing that actual food, that food on the traceability list, even though it's in that multi-ingredient food, you're tracing that food throughout that supply chain. So next, if the food is changed to a form that is not on the FTL or food traceability list, for example, by drying or freezing, then that food would no longer be covered by the rule. For example, fresh spinach, fresh peppers, and fresh herbs are all on the list, but frozen spinach, dried peppers, and dried herbs would not be covered by the rule. And then for foods on the FTL or foods that are on the food traceability list that are not designated as fresh, if those foods are used as ingredients in a multi-ingredient food, then that multi-ingredient food is covered by the final rule. For example, peanut butter in a sandwich cracker, for which there's no additional kill step applied, will be covered by the final rule. And then lastly, if you do apply a kill step to the food on the FTL, on the food traceability list, we use FTL, it's easier to say, so I think I'm going to start doing that. So if you apply a kill step to a food on the FTL, the requirements of the final rule would not apply to your subsequent shipping of the food or to anyone else who handles the food after you've shipped it. And after you've applied that kill step. You will, however, have to keep records of that, of a application of that kill step. For example, fresh tomatoes covered by the rule, you apply, you can those tomatoes, subsequently they're not covered by the rule. Okay, so now we want to talk about the foundational framework of the food traceability rule. The food traceability rule identifies key points along the supply chain where it is most important to collect traceability information. These points along the supply chain are called critical tracking events, or CTEs. And these include points where food is harvested, cooled, initially packed for raw agricultural commodities, first received on land from a fishing vessel for seafood, transformed, shipped, and received. At each CTE, or critical tracking event, we are requiring certain traceability information essential to understanding what happened to the food at that point. And these are called key data elements, or KDEs. And I think one of the things your group is interested in is common language or common terminology. And I think that's really this approach, this framework and this approach that we've taken in the rule standardizes traceability information across the entire food supply chain. Importantly, the records required at each of the CTEs would need to contain and link the traceability lot code of the food to the other relevant information, or KDEs, or key data elements that you're collecting. So everything goes back and it's connected to that lot code, and it's consistent throughout the supply chain. So this is a supply chain example. We have a lot of these on our website, and this is a very basic example of a supply chain. So, and what the intent here is to show that a firm's role and their activities in that supply chain will determine which key data elements or the information they must keep and share according to the rule. This example is a generic supply chain for fresh produce, which will be sold at retail. For example, this could be fresh cucumbers or tomatoes or fresh leafy greens, any one of those. You can see the specific KDEs required to be kept at each of the critical tracking events underneath each one of these supply points in the supply chain. In some cases, one entity may conduct multiple critical tracking events. For example, if you can see the initial packer who's right in the middle, the initial packer of fresh lettuce would be required to keep pieces of information pertaining to that initial packing event. Since that same entity also most likely ships the food to the next point in the supply chain, that entity would also keep KDEs required under the shipping CTE. The shipping CTE also identifies certain information or key data elements that must be sent to the person receiving the shipment of the food. So when you look at that shipping KDE section in the rule, you'll see which pieces of information need to be sent to the next person down the line. Since all of these entities are covered by the rule, everyone from the farm to retail food establishment are covered by the rule in this supply chain, each entity, including the farm, would also need to maintain a traceability plan, which we'll discuss and we'll touch on later. Okay, so to drill down a little bit deeper on that initial packer, which we identified, we could go into detail on each one, but we're going to pick on the initial packer here. So to drill down a little bit deeper, this slide shows an example for what is expected for an entity that performs initial packing as outlined in the provision, it's 1.1330. So that's where you would go to find the initial packer requirements. So there are a few caveats here. First, the KDEs that are listed on this slide and on other similar slides that I mentioned, like either in this presentation or on our website, these are a summary only. They're a summary of the required KDEs. They're not the precise KDEs that are in the rule. So obviously you need to look at the rule to see what those precise requirements are, but these are generally just summaries of what would be required. The precise KDEs can be found in the rule, obviously. Secondly, this example does not apply to food obtained from a fishing vessel. So we're talking like if you go back to the slide that I was looking at before, this is the supply chain for fresh produce. So the initial packing KDE encompasses both the first and second column. So the initial packer in this supply chain example, the KDEs that relate to the initial packing are in the first and the second column. The left column contains the initial packing KDEs that relate to the incoming raw agricultural commodity. So each piece of information should be linked to each traceability lot that gets packed. This means that for each data element, a firm should be able to identify the corresponding traceability lot using the lot code, a traceability lot code. Firms will keep information about what products are coming in, how much, when and where it came from, with some additional information about harvesting and cooling, which will have been provided by the harvester and cooler to the initial packer. And then as shown in the middle column, information will also be kept about the packing process itself, such as when and where the food was packed, how much was packed, and what traceability lot code was assigned. Since all of the information in both of these first two columns is kept for each traceability lot, the information will all be linked together so that information is available about the incoming raw agricultural commodity that became part of that traceability lot. Similar information is captured for shipping, which is a separate critical tracking event. Most of the shipping KDEs need to be sent to the next person in the supply chain, but the initial packing KDEs do not need to be sent forward. Okay, so we also developed another interactive online tool. This tool, that's just the first page that you'll get to when you go there. It identifies the KDEs or the specific information that's required for each critical tracking event within the final rule. So you can see on the top, you see the different tabs. Those are the critical tracking events. And depending on which one you click on, the page in front of you will describe what KDEs apply to that critical tracking event. So this is a lot easier. It's a lot more friendly to come here and use this tool when you're looking at, you're trying to figure out what KDEs apply to you or to a particular situation based on the CTE that's happening in that supply chain. And hopefully we'll have time and I can go over this real quickly. Okay, so to recap again, the framework of the CTEs and KDEs allows the FDA to standardize the information that industry maintains and shares for traceability across the food supply chain. This will help FDA more quickly identify and go back to entities within the supply chain. Requiring traceability lot codes to be kept and shared along the supply chain is also critical to be able to track the movement of the food by the lot code. This can help enable FDA to avoid issuing overly broad recalls, as sometimes it's been done in the past, which can help limit the adverse impacts on the industry sectors affected by such outbreaks. Records required under the final rule need to be provided to FDA within 24 hours of a request or within some reasonable time to which FDA has agreed. This standardized information, as well as requiring records to be provided within 24 hours, can lead to faster identification and rapid removal of potentially contaminated food from the market. And this will result in fewer foodborne illnesses and death. The goal of the traceability rule is to ensure that KDEs, or the critical, the key data elements, the information that's being maintained, can be maintained across the supply chain for more efficient and effective tracing, while providing firms flexibility within their existing tracing systems. So the final rule specifies what records must be kept or what information must be kept, but not how it's kept. The traceability lot code is an integral component of the traceability requirements. It links to the other KDEs or the information required, and it includes the traceability lot code source, which provides the physical location where the traceability lot code for an FDL food was assigned. Obtaining that traceability lot code and the traceability lot code source enables FDA to get to the source faster, going to those points in the supply chain that handle the product and assign the traceability lot code, in order to get to the possible source of contamination more efficiently. Another requirement is that every entity covered by the rule must maintain the traceability plan. So that traceability plan is unique to that particular entity, and it describes your traceability procedures and helps the FDA understand how a firm is maintaining the required records and identifying the food traceability list foods that they handle, because every entity will handle a different number, and that may change over time. This requirement applies to farms as well. Even if they don't have to maintain any KDEs, they do need to have a traceability plan, which is essentially a farm map at this point when you look at the rule. Finally, working with your supply chain partners is critical to maintaining traceability in your supply chain. The requirements specify the information that not only needs to be maintained by a firm or by you, but shared by you with the next firm in the supply chain. Okay, so we have another example here. A firm's role and activities in the specific supply chain will determine which pieces of information or KDEs they must keep and share. To illustrate this, we have a few examples to show you. In this case, we have imported mangoes, where the importer does not physically handle the product, which is a common scenario. In this case, since the importer does not hold the food, they are not covered by the rule, even though they could still play a role in facilitating transfer of paperwork or information on behalf of their supply chain. And I wanted to point out that that section that covers the allowance of establishing and maintaining records by another entity is 1.1455B. So you can rely on another entity under certain conditions. So you can see the specific KDEs required to be kept at each critical tracking event in this supply chain. In some cases, one entity may conduct multiple critical tracking events. Again, the initial packer, the distributor. For example, the initial packer of mangoes here would be required to keep pieces of information pertaining to initial packing, as well as shipping. The shipping CTE also identifies those pieces of information, or KDEs, key data elements, that must be sent to the person receiving the shipment of the food. Since all of these entities, again, are covered by the rule, they must have a traceability plan. So the next slide, this is the same scenario, but in this scenario, the importer does hold the food. In this case, the importer is covered by the rule and must maintain, as you can see, they're included. They must maintain receiving as well as shipping KDEs because they're shipping to the distributor. And finally, another example, a little bit more complicated example of aquacultured shrimp imported to the United States, just to show you something different and to include something that includes the transformation step. So transformation is another critical tracking event in the rule, where the traceability lock code would also be assigned in addition to the initial packing and the initial packer signing the lock code. Again, in this case, the importer does not hold the food. So what we're demonstrating here is the initial, you see the initial packing in the middle. They're receiving the raw agricultural commodity. They assign that lock code. They initially pack, assign a lock code. I'm sorry, it's not, it's seafood in this case. And they're passing it on to the seafood processor. Seafood processor transforms the food. They keep the traceability lock code from the initial incoming raw agricultural commodity, and that's seafood. They transform the food and they keep the new traceability lock code as well. And then the importer's on the outside and it continues through the supply chain. Okay, so now we're this very high overview of the records maintenance and availability requirements. So records can be maintained either as original paper records. They don't have to be electronic. They can be paper records. They can be electronic records, or they can be true copies. Records must be maintained for 2 years. Records need to be made available to FDA within 24 hours of a request, or within some reasonable time to which FDA has agreed, which we added because sometimes it may take you a little longer. And when you're talking to the FDA upon our request, we're going to be reasonable. You know, we want the information, which is the most important part. So we set a standard of 24 hours or within some reasonable time to which FDA has agreed. During an outbreak or other threat to public health, an electronic sortable spreadsheet must be provided within 24 hours of request unless that entity is exempt. And this request could be made by phone. So this is, again, only during an outbreak situation or another threat to public health. This is where we have the electronic sortable spreadsheet requirement. It's only in those situations. In certain circumstances, FDA can require that the records that are required under the rule generally be provided to FDA as in an electronic sortable spreadsheet. In these situations, these situations would include when it's necessary to help prevent or mitigate a foodborne illness outbreak, to assist in the implementation of a recall, or to otherwise address a threat to public health. Again, the electronic sortable spreadsheet would not be requested during a routine inspection, which we plan to do some routine records requests. And then this slide just generally covers the compliance state, which is the same for all entities across the supply chains. This provides industry the time for let me go back. The compliance date is January 20th, 2026. It's a little less than 3 years from now. This provides the industry the time to coordinate effective implementation of the rule and collaborate with each other as needed on their tracing systems. And then also consistent with other FSMA rules, the FDA intends to take the approach of educating before and while we implement this rule. So once the compliance date is passed, we intend to use our standard regulatory inspection tools, including discussing violations at the time of our review of records, to inform the covered entities of any violations or discrepancies with the rule as they are observed, and to provide firms with a reasonable opportunity to comply. And then we will continue our outreach and education and providing technical assistance to help industry come into compliance. We also intend to post additional communication materials on our website, though we have quite a bit, and we'll get to that in a second, to help further explain parts of the rule or provide additional examples. We are also actively working on developing a way for stakeholders to submit requested traceability information to the FDA. Most likely this will be through a portal, which will allow firms to upload records or electronic sortable spreadsheets while protecting the confidentiality of the information provided. More information on all of this will be communicated in the future as we develop. And then we are currently considering the best approach for structuring and conducting records inspections under this rule. This includes both routine inspections and the outbreak scenarios that we mentioned. We plan to work with our state, local, tribal, and territorial and other regulatory partners to implement efficient enforcement of the rule, including coordinating our actions or deferring to each other when a particular agency is best situated to act swiftly to protect consumers. We are still determining how we will work with our regulatory partners in the implementation and enforcement of this rule. And I also wanted to add that we're aware of the complexities and situations where FDA does not currently or has limited reach. As we discuss and develop implementation and enforcement strategies, we are considering our relationships and agreements with regulatory partners, as well as the specific situations, such as whether the request is a routine records request or part of a public health event like an outbreak. So there's much more information to come on this because we are currently in that development process. The point of me mentioning this is that this is AFTO and there are a lot of our regulatory partners here, and one of the most probably the most routine requests we get or inquiries we get are, how are we going to do this? How is FDA going to implement this? Considering all the complexities with the retail side and the farm side especially. And then will you be doing a routine inspection? Will this only be in an outbreak scenario? And so all of those things need to be considered, and we definitely want this to be the most efficient and effective tool for us, which is really the main point, is to get product off the market as swiftly as possible during an outbreak scenario to prevent further illnesses. And finally, the next two slides, and this is coming to the end here, the next two slides provide links to our resources. So this page right here, you see at the very top, starting from the left to the right, you have the Federal Register, which is a monster. You go there, you click on that Federal Register, you could easily lose yourself. The link directly below is a bookmark that goes directly to the codified within that Federal Register document. I've provided this presentation, so you should be able to use that. Also, if you go to the Federal Register itself and that you have that humongous document in front of you, you can use Control F to search for certain terms and find things that you're looking for. The next bullet here is the Food Traceability Final Rule webpage. All of this information you can find by starting there. And in fact, we have new translations there. It's not only in English, but it's in various other languages, and there's more to come as well as we continue to develop those translations. One of the things that I use mostly is, you might find interesting and helpful, is the FAQs. You may have a question or think about something and it's already been asked and we have already responded. And so there might be some FAQs that apply to you or something that you're thinking about. We've also got our recorded webinar, and we have that was you know, during the when we released the rule, or we published the final rule, we hosted a webinar, and the recording of that webinar is on that webpage. There are other recordings as well, a lot of other things that outreach that we've done. The critical tracking events and key data elements document that I showed you before, and the exemptions tool are there. There's the food traceability list with additional descriptions of the foods that are on the food traceability list. And there's also the risk ranking model results, which I think is very fascinating. A lot of scientific minds here on this call, you might find that interesting. This basically provides the background to how the food traceability list was developed. And then the last page, these are additional just direct links to information, additional resources that you can find by just simply going to that initial food traceability webpage. But this will provide you some more direct links depending on what you're looking for. We've provided some supply chain examples during this presentation, but we have a lot more. There's some basic ones, the produce supply chain examples, seafood supply chain, cheese supply chain, and we're still developing additional ones depending on what kind of inquiries and requests we've been receiving. We have specific information and resources for the retail food establishments. This is a unique area for retail food establishments to have an FDA regulation apply to them. And so there's some additional information and resources to help there as well. And of course, we have the TAN Technical Assistance Network. So if you have a question that you don't find elsewhere, or even if you did, you can ask it again. And you can send that question or that inquiry to the TAN. And so what I'd like to do now is I would like to go to this web page. And I realize there may be questions. Go ahead.
We have we have time, so we can definitely go to the webpage.
Okay, I'm going to slide this over here. So I have 3 screens available. So I have all this stuff going on over here. But when I clicked on that food traceability webpage, this is where I end up. So this is what you'll see when you do that. It has a lot of, it starts out just basically, hey, the food traceability list, or the food traceability rule, getting started. This is a good place to start. If you know nothing, know nothing about the food traceability rule, we have a little start here. This may, catch someone's eye. Getting started, go here. Do the exemptions apply to you? What's the food traceability list? Critical tracking events, what are those?
Alita, we're not seeing that right off.
Okay. So. I'm giving it a little more time.
Sounds good.
Because I can see.
You may have to share your another screen, Alita. We're still seeing the PowerPoint.
Okay, let me stop share and then I'll share again. I'll give it a second.
We're good. We're seeing it.
Okay. Yeah, there's a bandwidth issue with us, one of the California carriers, and sometimes this happens. I would think electrons travel pretty quickly, so there must be some bad coding going on. But okay, so here you are. You're at the FSMA final rule for the food traceability, additional traceability records for certain foods. So the formal name, the food traceability rule. And you see, you just start out with some basic information, the compliance state. And then let me minimize this, you have all of these different topics here to just, if you have no idea what the food traceability rule is or how it applies to you, getting started with the food traceability rule is a good place to start. So you click on that and you get the food traceability list, get a link to that. So when you go here, you'll end up with the food traceability list. And a lot of more, details about describing what it is, what the different, commodities, what commodities apply and what don't. So it's very, and it goes down here into when we're going to update it, what the risk ranking model is. Let's see, we had the full and partial exemptions. Let's see if we have the exemptions. I'm hoping that this is going to be the exemptions tool. Yes. So you see, it's a pretty neat little tool, I think, exemptions to the food traceability rule. So do you manufacture, process, or hold a food? So if you can see, you're going to end up answering questions. Yes, I do. Then as it asks questions and as you answer them and you respond, you'll end up with the result, and you'll determine whether in that situation, depending on your responses, whether you're exempt, partially exempt, or you're not exempt at all. Critical tracking events and key data elements. As I mentioned before, we have quite a few different translations at this point, and we're continuing to develop additional translations. Oh no, so I'm going to have to do this again. I don't think this is going to share. So I'm thinking that you're not seeing the tool.
Nope, not seeing the tool, but I do see that you have more languages added.
Yes, isn't that, I love that. We've done that. We obviously need to do that. Considering this is, this includes imported food. This includes foreign, foreign entities that are covered. So I'm going to try sharing this again. And just let me know. I know we're short on time, but hopefully you will soon see the tool that covers the critical tracking events and KDEs. Can anyone confirm that you see this?
It appears that we do see it.
Okay,
I just saw your mouse move.
great. So so far it's working. So generally you have the general description of the food traceability rule. If you go to harvesting, so you click on this first tab, you get the harvesting KDEs. It explains to you, you need to keep the location description for the immediate subsequent recipient. So who received it, what commodity was it, how much quantity and just it goes through all of the KDEs, and I think this is very helpful. Rather than having to go to the rule itself, which is really cumbersome, you can at least start here and get an idea of what information you need to be keeping depending on where you are in the supply chain. Let's see, I'm going to minimize this. Probably going to stay there for you. And what are you seeing now?
On that. We're on harvesting.
Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'll do one more. I'll do one more because I think this isn't. I think that we've done a really good job at providing a lot more information. Finally, at the end of all of all of the FSMA regulations that we've implemented. This one we received quite a few comments during the rulemaking process. We continued to receive comments and inquiries, and so there's a lot of information. So we want to make sure that folks are ready to comply, starting on the compliance date. And so hopefully what you're seeing on your screen now is that I've expanded the supply chain examples on the same page. So we're still on this, if you just come here to the food traceability rule webpage.
That's correct. We can see those.
Excellent. So you have all these topics, and as you expand them, you have a lot more information. So each of these I had shown you in one of the slides in my presentation that we have additional supply chain examples. And a lot of people are visual. So if you go to any one of these, it's very helpful to just see where you are in the supply chain and, how your supply chain may connect to you. The previous shipper and the next subsequent receiver. So it's very helpful. We also have guidance for industry. So we write in, if you click on this, what you'll see is the small entity compliance guide that was a statutory requirement for us to develop quickly, which we did, thanks to Lillian. We also have the FAQs right under that, I think is very helpful. This is where the next, where you can find all the webinars and meetings and some information. So you see that we've done a lot of outreach, and you can see the result of that and in our responses and what the agency's thinking, particularly about one thing or another. So if you're an importer, if you're a foreign supplier, if you produce produce, if you're a distributor, if you're a retail establishment, we've had a lot of inquiries and responses to a lot of those things. So a lot of the situations. So with that, I think I can stop sharing, and I'm happy to take any questions either now or I would like to point out, we did ask for questions ahead of time, and I don't think we had any, but I can do my best to answer questions now, or if any come up, we're happy to address them later.
Okay, well, I think the message is stay tuned. It's going to be
Okay.
a learning curve.
Yeah, I'm hoping that, generally what I would like to convey is it's really not that hard. Industry has been tracing food, already. And what we're trying to do, obviously, is required by Congress, is to standardize how we do that. The requirements, what we're going to do, we plan on doing routine records requests. So we plan on monitoring and evaluating how the industry is complying with the rule. And we hope that that will help all of us in a situation when we have an outbreak, so that the rule is applied appropriately and we can track things quickly and get it off the market. That's the whole game. And that's what we plan on doing. And we'll keep all of these complexities with our regulatory partners and the uniqueness of the supply chain industry. We'll keep all of that in mind as we're developing those implementation strategies. So thanks again. Thanks for having me.
Very well said. Thank you. Excellent presentation. And now I will turn it over to LaTanya for a closing comment.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can you hear me? Make sure I do a sound check.
Yes, we can hear you, LaTanya.
Okay, good. Okay, well, I would like to thank our excellent speakers who provide us a wealth of information and resources on, cell culture, meat, and food traceability. So I hope you found their presentations as informative and engaging as I did. I do believe that continued outreach on both topics is essential. And I also want to personally thank our committee members, Sally and Julie, for serving as moderators. Great job, ladies. As I mentioned at the outset of the meeting, if the speakers can share their slides, in which most of them said they could, we will post them on the committee portal on the APTO's website. Let me see if, Jessica, are you able to share your screen and show them where the portal is, or do I need to do that? But
give me just a minute. I'll see if I can pull it up for you.
And if she's pulling it up, if you go to apto.org and there's a committee and the committees and portal tab, you'll be able to click the committee, and then you'll find the International Government Relations Committee portal. And then Jessica did mention that she's going to be able to share the link for the recording after the meeting, and she'll share that with me. And so I can share the recording with whomever would like to receive it. So just let me know. Okay, she's pulling it up. So yes,
so this is our page. You go to the committees and portals link here.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can go to view active committees. And then if you click on it, you can log into the committee portal from there. and you can join the committee. If anybody has any kind of issues, I'll put my email address in the chat and I can help you get joined if for some reason you have any problems joining. If you're not, but there's the join now link here. But the committee portal is right there. But I believe you actually have to log in and join the committee to be able to log into the portal itself.
And so you do not have to be a member of AFDO to join the committee, right? So I do want to share that, so you can just join the committee and sign up, because it includes a group of stakeholders: federal, state, local government, industry, academia, and consumer advocacy groups. And we pretty much we have monthly meetings, and they're generally held on Thursdays, depending upon our schedule. And we meet from the September, October timeframe to June. And so lastly, if you're attending the AFDO Educational Conference in a few weeks in Norfolk, Virginia, I look forward to meeting you or connecting with you. Jessica, is there anything you want to say about the upcoming conference?
No, but please come, please enjoy yourself. And I was actually at the beginning of the meeting telling LaTanya, Sunday night, we are having our Endowment Foundation event, and it will be karaoke. And we're going to have a 360 photo booth. And then Monday night event will be dinner on a yacht out in the harbor near Norfolk, Virginia. So if you come, please make sure that you attend both of those events, or, you know, either one of those, but join us and have a good time.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. Okay, well, this concludes our committee session. Again, thank you all for joining, and have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much,
Thank you.
LaTanya, Jessica, Julie, everyone.